Chapter 1974, Reverse Entropy Realm. If it wasn't absolutely necessary, he would never disturb the mountain of corruption. Amir argued, "Your Majesty, you are right. But now, this is the only path we haven't tried in this world." Saladin stroked his neatly trimmed goatee and looked at the sage Halade, who was standing behind him on his right, looking frail and old. This man in his 80s was covered in wrinkles, his eyelids drooped so low that his eyes were barely visible, and his skin was covered with age spots. He gave the impression that he could die at any moment. But as a sage of the assassins, this was precisely his best disguise. Assassin meant assassin. If it weren't for knowing Halade, when he appeared beside his target, who would be wary of such a person? Who would have thought that he was once the most powerful assassin of the assassins? "Your Excellency Halade, what do you think of this matter?" Hearing Saladin's question, Halade opened his eyes, and a sharp gleam flashed beneath his drooping eyelids. He. He laughed very unpleasantly, because only half of his teeth remained, and the air leaked out when he laughed. "It looks like if we want to leave here, we'll have to fight that guy. Otherwise, what's the point of exiling us to this world?" He paused, his tone growing serious. "However, provoking that creature will come at a heavy cost. The more clumsy it appears, the harder it is to deal with. Moreover, our goal is not to kill it, but to seal it away. That makes the task even more difficult." As he spoke, Halade silently took an old backpack from behind him. It was very heavy and seemed to contain something hard inside. "Your Majesty, Crown Prince. The two of you need to suppress the monster in front of you, and then I will try to seal it with the holy relic. If all goes well, we will be able to leave this area." Saladin stared at the backpack in Halade's hand and nodded. "I'll leave everything to you." Saladin was the nominal leader of the assassins, but that was only because he was the emperor and the leader of the vast Khitan Empire. In the hearts of the followers, the status of the saints was perhaps no less than his. The assassins originated from the Holy Zoran sect. Like the Eastern Orthodox Church, it originated from the ancient Messianic faith. The Eastern Orthodox Church had the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the assassins also had ancient heirlooms. Saladin lifted his black robe and drew his curved saber, Zulfiqar, from his waist. "Amir, you come and assist me in suppressing this huge piece of meat," Saladin said. Amir nodded, his eyes cold, and also pulled two long swords from his waist, preparing for battle. Hoo! The huge mountain of corruption let out an eerie roar and rolled across the desert. Everywhere it passed, large areas of the desert disappeared, leaving behind a long trail of blood, entrails, and fat. Saladin's eyes were like those of a hawk, narrowing and gradually stretching out. His body seemed to melt and spread out on the ground, becoming a long, narrow shadow. Whoosh! The huge shadow wielded a curved sword and rushed straight towards the huge body of the mountain of corruption. Amir, who was beside him, was only half a step behind, closely following Saladin from his side. Halade slowly opened the package, and inside was a piece of black stone. This was the holy relic of the assassins, the Kaaba black stone. The one in Halade's hand was said to have been sat on by the one God when he preached, so it retained the holy mark of the one God and possessed supreme power. He held the stone up with the utmost solemnity, placed it on his lips and kissed it carefully, then touched it with his forehead. In the next moment, his body floated up, and he stood cross-legged in midair, holding the black stone high above his head and began to chant the Zualan scripture. "In the name of the one God, who is merciful and compassionate. When the night envelopes the earth with the tongue of a poisonous snake, and the chains of the fiery hell rise from the abyss, I have indeed ordered the legions of angels to line up in the sky with the thunderous stroke of his pen, tearing apart the false covenant. The whispers of the unbelievers are the arrows of Iblis, but the foundations of the earth can only be upheld by the name of Allah. You say, the fiery flames of the seven heavens have consumed the schemes, the power of the demons has crumbled in the glory of the Almighty. Every shadow will be pierced by the spear of light, every seductive word will be drowned by the torrent of truth. I grant those who fear me eyes to see through the fog, and walls of brass to block the breath of evil. This is the clear proof of the right path, and only those who rely on it will enjoy eternal peace." The chant was not loud, but it carried far, and the black stone did not react, lying quietly in Halade's palm. Halade was not in a hurry, because this stone had been silent for countless years. To awaken it, the most devout faith was needed. So Halade pulled a curved sword from his waist and cut his wrist, letting the blood flow onto the black stone. He seemed oblivious to the pain and began to pray even more devoutly. On the battlefield ahead, Saladin and Amir had arrived in front of the huge mountain of corruption. From afar, they could smell a strong, pungent stench, as if it were a huge pile of corpses. "Amir!" Saladin's voice came from the shadows. Crown Prince Amir leaped high into the air, the two curved swords in his hands shining silver, and launched a series of slashes at the huge body of the mountain of corruption. Shadowy light rushed out from the curved swords, and the mountain of corruption, seemingly oblivious to the danger surrounding it, was struck directly. Buzz! The swords struck the surface of the mountain of corruption, causing faint ripples, but no substantial damage. However, that was enough. Amir's ability was called Reverse Entropy Realm. It did not directly cause damage to enemies, but it could double entropy and entropy reduction. In this state, he could greatly reduce the damage he received and even heal the injuries his body had sustained. Conversely, he could also increase the damage his enemies received exponentially. What would normally be a minor injury, such as a broken pinky finger, would become a massive injury, such as a crushed arm. "Your Majesty, it's up to you now," Amir said to Saladin. Chapter 1975, Kaaba Blackstone. Saladin didn't need to say anything, as the holy sword Zulfiqar in his hand had already attacked. After becoming two-dimensional, his body had no thickness, so he was able to make the sharpest slashes. In the shadows, a black light rose from the ground like a huge curtain, thousands of meters high, and rushed towards the mountain of corruption. When the shadow blade collided with the mountain of corruption, one could clearly feel that its fat flesh had undergone some changes. It sank deeply, reaching a depth of hundreds of meters, almost cutting the mountain of corruption in half. However, the tight flesh quickly stopped changing shape, and instead, the shadow blade was unable to advance. Like a tightly stretched spring, the mountain of corruption's body suddenly shot forward. Bang! The shadow blade was knocked into midair, while the mountain of corruption's flesh, although it looked like it had been cut in half, returned to its original form without even a single cut. This was a monster with only the instinct to eat. It didn't even have any intelligence to speak of. You could think of it as Mammon's stomach. That's why it could devour everything and naturally possessed the ability to consume all matter. This included forces invading from the outside world. Hoo-hoo! After being attacked, the mountain of corruption shook violently, and holes grew on its huge, rotten body, like the nose of a pig. Suck! The mountain of corruption sucked in forcefully, creating a gust of wind that lifted the surrounding desert and sucked everything into its body. The powerful suction forced Amir to retreat temporarily. Saladin remained in shadow form, looking for an opportunity to launch his next attack. This mass of flesh looks like it's full of gaps. As long as my slash can penetrate its internal organs, with Amir's reverse entropy realm ability, I can destroy it from the inside. With that in mind, Saladin once again clung to the body of the mountain of corruption. However, just as he was about to stab his sword into one of the gaps in the flesh, he suddenly felt the life force rapidly draining from his body. Even his two-dimensional body was almost pulled into the body of the mountain of corruption. Mammon's stomach could devour everything in this universe, including the foundation of all living things, the spirit body. Even if he was reduced to a two-dimensional shadow, he couldn't escape such devouring. Saladin was startled and quickly detached himself from the body of the mountain of corruption. But at that moment, the huge mountain of flesh suddenly turned around. As if it had smelled something delicious, dozens of thick legs grew from beneath it and rushed towards Saladin. A shadow appeared in Saladin's eyes, his slender body was wrapped tightly in a black robe, and with a wave of his left hand, shadows spread out like flowing water at his feet. Shadow Legion. From within the tide of shadows, one shadow assassin after another appeared. These were the souls of shadow assassins that Saladin had collected. They were all dressed in black assassin outfits, holding curved swords and daggers in their hands, and charging toward the mountain of corruption in groups. They were extremely fast and, like Saladin, could attack their opponents in two-dimensional shadow form, and their killing power was extremely fierce. Shadow assassins covered the mountains and surrounded the mountain of corruption, aiming their weapons at its body and launching a fierce attack. Curved swords, daggers, and hidden arrows rained down from all directions. As long as they caused even a fraction of damage, they would reap dozens of times the reward. However, when the powerful shadow weapons struck the flesh of the mountain of corruption, they melted away as quickly as snow in the sun, without causing even the slightest damage. We need to aim for the cracks in its body. A shadow assassin took out a huge crossbow from behind, used the shadows as arrows, and aimed at a fierce crack on the back of the mountain of corruption, where its organs were swaying and looked like they were about to fall out at any moment. The shadow assassin pulled back the crossbow, and then fired an arrow directly at the crack. Whoosh! The shadow arrow flew through the air at an incredible speed, stretching out as it traveled. According to the theory of shadow weapons, they could theoretically stretch infinitely, causing immense damage. However, when the arrow struck the wound, it did not shatter or tear it apart as expected. Instead, a long, sticky, intestine-like organ emerged from within the wound. It swallowed the arrow whole. Saladin carefully observed the shadow assassin's attacks. He only needed to find a weak spot, and he would launch a fierce attack along the weak point of the mountain of corruption. Unfortunately, the mountain of corruption completely ignored the shadow assassin's attacks and quickly rushed towards Saladin. Bang! 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 A huge mountain of flesh and blood rushed towards him. Saladin retreated while slashing out one huge shadow blade after another with his curved sword. The vast shadow blades were 1,000 meters high and pierced through thousands of meters, with the power to destroy a city. However, no matter how fierce his attacks were, it was difficult to cut through this huge, foul-smelling mountain of flesh. On the contrary, his attacks only made the mountain of flesh grow much larger. This guy can absorb enemy attacks and then grow? Saladin quickly pulled away in the desert and circled around the mountain of corruption. However, the seemingly clumsy mountain of corruption, after smelling its prey, moved with incredible speed and pursued him relentlessly. In the distance, Halade was still reciting sutras to awaken the holy relic. Amir could only watch from afar at this point. Although he was powerful, if he couldn't cause any damage to the enemy, then he was useless. Now, he could only hope that Saladin would find its weakness and open a breach so that he could join forces with Saladin to fight the enemy. Swords are useless against him, and energy attacks are completely absorbed. He's almost invincible. It's a pity that I don't have an illusionist with me, otherwise I could try using illusions. So what should we do next? Faced with such a tough opponent, Saladin frowned and thought about a countermeasure. Suddenly, an idea popped into his head. Since the conventional approach won't work, why not think outside the box? Swish! 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 Several shadow blades slashed at the mountain of corruption, causing his flesh to sink deeply once again, but it was as if they were cutting into a non-Newtonian fluid with a knife. The powerful force couldn't break through at all. Instead, the mountain of corruption absorbed the impact, causing his body to become even larger.